You've probably heard of fracking. It's how drillers break up underground rock to get at oil and gas. Its formal name is hydraulic fracturing, and around 2007 it took off, making the US the top oil and natural gas producer in the world. But fracking isn't actually new. It was invented in the 1940s, but kind of overlooked for decades. So, why did fracking all of a sudden become this huge deal? The answer is a three-part story of geology, economics, and technology. And pastries. Let's start with number one, geology. Oil and gas is found in sedimentary rocks, which are made up of a bunch of ingredients: sand, mud, and prehistoric life. They're mixed together, deposited, and baked underground for millions of years. Some of these rocks are porous, meaning they have big holes that can hold fluid, kinda like jelly donuts, with pockets of delicious and energy-rich oil and gas in the middle. Getting oil and gas out of these jelly donut rocks is simple. Drill a well, and the pressure from all the rocks above will push it to the surface. Other rocks end up more like layer cakes. And just like cakes, some of those rock layers are also porous, but instead of big pockets, they have lots of teeny tiny cavities that can hold fluid. Fluid like chocolate sauce or energy-dense oil and gas. Often, these layers aren't permeable, meaning all these teeny tiny pockets of oil and gas are locked up. They can't flow anywhere. To get the oil and gas out, we have to create cracks and channels by pumping water, sand, and chemicals down inside, fracturing the cake, the rock. That's fracking. Now, fracking a layer cake is trickier and spendier than sucking the filling out of a jelly donut, which brings us to the second part of our fracking story, economics. Turns out, the US is filled with lots and lots of jelly donut rocks and layer cake rocks. But after 150 years of drilling, those cheaper, easier jelly donut deposits were running out. By the early 2000s, energy companies and policymakers in the US were getting seriously freaked out. Where will all the oil and gas come from? From the unstable Middle East, or from countries in crisis like Venezuela? The options weren't good. As the price of oil and gas went up and up, the US also entered a recession, leaving people hungry for economic opportunities. Those expensive, tricky layer cake rocks began to look a bit more tempting, whipping up investment in element number 3 in our fracking story, technology. We got better at drilling way deep into the earth. Plus, we figured out how to drill horizontally, creating many more cracks and freeing up more oil and gas. Combining horizontal drilling with fracking, now we could finally extract those tasty little pockets of oil and gas efficiently. By the end of the decade, we had all the necessary ingredients, the geology, the economic conditions, and the technology for a fracking boom. A boom that's made the US the #1 oil and gas producer in the world, but one that has also brought lots of controversy. What does fracking do to the air, to the water, to the climate? When it comes to drilling an oil and gas well, who decides where and how a well is drilled, or if it gets drilled at all? It's a complex game with conflicting interests and high stakes. But first, who are the players? Well, there's the person who owns the underground oil and gas, we call those mineral rights. They stand to gain royalties from drilling companies who lease those rights. And there's the person who owns the land where the well needs to go, and the people next door, and the people who work and go to school across the street, plus the company drilling the well, its managers and executives, as well as its engineers, geologists, and roughnecks, and don't forget the financial investors. We're not done yet. We've also got regulators, elected officials, and government employees from the city, to the county, to the state, and in some cases, even the federal government. Drilling transcends political boundaries through both the fuel it provides and the pollutants it produces. So this one well indirectly affects people all over the world. So what's the goal of this game? Well, say you're playing as an executive at an oil and gas company. What motivates you? Now step into the role of a parent sending your child to preschool across the street from a well pad. Different goals, right? Or imagine you're a state lawmaker concerned with keeping your constituents happy. Winning means something different for you. Let's set our game in a real place, Broomfield, Colorado, a town that has had to make a lot of decisions about drilling recently, and see how it plays out there. An oil and gas company makes the first move, leasing mineral rights from owners for a place where they think they might find oil and gas underground. It's Broomfield's move next. The city forms a task force to learn more about the public health impacts of drilling. Somewhere along the way, the state also takes a turn approving or denying the permit. It's a tenuous balancing act. Now, it's up to the company and the city to negotiate how to drill safely together. To make it official, Broomfield City Council votes on an agreement, a legal contract detailing how this is all going to work. If either side breaks the agreement, they could end up in court. So, what are the stakes? The actions we take now have impacts on the economy and the ecosystem. There will be winners and losers today and down the road. What if we add new players? The grandson of a family living adjacent to the well pad. The great niece of the oil company executive. The head of the power company 50 years from now, tasked with providing electricity to this community. Or the city water manager, making sure there's enough water for people, animals, and industry. The question of who decides where to drill, how to drill, or whether to drill at all doesn't have an easy answer. It's a complex, evolving game that no one wants to lose. In America, we use a lot of water. We grow food, make stuff, we drink it, and flush it down the drain. But most of our water goes to something that might surprise you: energy. Nearly half of all the water we use goes to making electricity. We burn fossil fuels or split atoms to boil water and use that steam to spin generators. And voila, electricity. Typically, once it's cool, that water makes its way back into the environment, where it can be reused again and again and again. But in the last few decades, we've got a new way of using water to harness energy: hydraulic fracturing, better known as fracking. Fracking uses water to break up rocks deep underground, releasing oil and natural gas. A typical fracking operation pumps millions of gallons of water into each well. The pressure of that water forces open tiny cracks, or fractures, in the rock. We also add sand and chemicals such as benzene that prop the cracks open so oil and gas can escape. This combo of chemicals, sand and water, is known as frac fluid. After breaking the rock apart underground, the frac fluid flows back to the surface. Water that was trapped in rock deep underground also flows up to the surface. This produced water can contain hydrocarbons, radioactive elements, salts, and hazardous chemicals, in addition to the dangerous chemicals in the frac fluid. All this means we can't just stick water from fracking anywhere, like into our drinking water supply. It has to go somewhere safe, typically back underground into a wastewater injection well. And pumping all that water back underground can cause problems, like earthquakes. The amount of water used in fracking is actually pretty small compared to electricity generation or agriculture, but it's really hard to reuse. And because disposing of frac fluid and produced water is super expensive, fracking operators are finding ways to get more mileage out of every gallon. Like reusing the water to frack new wells, or instead of starting with fresh water, some operators try to use water that we couldn't drink anyway, like brackish water, for fracking. As fracking continues, tensions remain between two things we need a lot of: energy and water. Cars, coffee, cat videos, canned pineapple? None of these things are really things without energy. But although energy makes our whole world work, we don't think about it that much. Even the basic stuff, like how much energy do we use? And where does our energy come from? So let's take a look. For most of human history, our energy use was pretty flat. But in the past century, it skyrocketed. In the US, you use 3 times as much energy as your great-grandmother did 100 years ago, when they used more wood than oil. Like every animal, we use energy from the sun to stay warm, and we use the chemical energy from food to fuel our bodies. Worldwide, our biggest single source of energy isn't food, though. It's petroleum. We turn a lot of it into gasoline and diesel, which we use to move ourselves and our stuff around. But the vast majority of the energy we use today goes to generating electricity, which we do in all kinds of ways. We burn coal and natural gas, split atoms, dam rivers, harness wind, even turn sunlight directly into electricity. Where our electricity comes from depends on where we live. Countries like Poland and China get almost all of their electricity from coal, while others rely more on natural gas. A few countries rely almost entirely on hydroelectric dams, while even fewer get most of their electricity from nuclear fission. No country gets most of their electricity from wind and solar, though Denmark is getting close. How about the US? For decades, the American grid ran mostly on coal. But with the rise of fracking, still controversial, natural gas is pretty much tied for the top electricity spot. Travel around the country, however, and each region tells a different electricity story. In North Dakota, a light bulb plugged into the grid will run on electricity made mostly from coal, while in Oregon, that same light bulb runs mainly on hydropower. In New Hampshire, you've got primarily nuclear power. And in Florida, mostly natural gas. After years of using more and more energy, demand in the US is starting to level off. We still use a lot. On average, an American uses 3 times the energy of someone in China. But then again, that same American only uses 1/3 of what an Icelander uses. But regardless of where you live, things will be very different for your great-grandkids. Our energy sources and uses are changing in major ways. Electric cars could edge out gasoline. Renewables are on the rise. Electricity generation is getting less centralized. And data is making us smarter about how we use energy. There's a lot at stake. Energy is more than a matter of comfort. It makes all of our important systems work. Health, the economy, communication, it's part of everything. And the choices we make now will determine how we use energy in the future.